the music of the Southern Diaspora. I reminded of the scene in Gone with the Wind where, I believe it was Topsy anyway, Melanie was about to go into labor, and Topsy said, Lordy, Miss Scarlett, I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. And I don't know nothing about no music. But fortunately, we have someone who does, who will come along in just a moment. A.B.D. Harrelson. So, my only real acquaintance with music happened about 60 years ago, or over 60 years ago, and I was sent to take piano lessons. And after the third encounter, the teacher said, you're hopeless, and I can't take your parents' money for trying to teach you this, and so leave and don't come back. That was my primary experience with music. But the Southern Diaspora is an important subject and one that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. Between 1900 and 1970, 20 million people left the South for the North and the West, particularly the Midwest and the Pacific states. 20 million people, 12 million white Southerners and 8 million black Southerners departed. And that's historically significant migration. Somebody has said it's one of the greatest voluntary migrations in history. And the reason for it, of course, was poverty. Because the South was a colonial region and the people were poor for the most part. Why else would anybody leave the South to go north except under economic compulsion? Most of the white diaspora was to the Midwest, the industrial Midwest, and the Pacific states. And in 1970, 12% of the population of the Midwest and the Pacific states were Southern born. And in 1970, there were 100,000 people born in the South who were working in the auto industry in the Midwest, to give you a sense of what is involved here. And of course, this was a human experience, and Southerners tend to react to things as a human experience. As we've already heard, Northerners tend to deal in abstractions, and Southerners tend to deal in that part of reality which cannot be reduced to abstractions. Among other things, there's a wonderful novel that came out of this experience, Harriet Arno, the Doll Maker. I don't know if you encountered that, but that is a real Southern classic. It's about a Kentucky mountain woman enduring industrial Detroit. And it really is a wonderful thing. And some of the music that we'll get to will carry a similar message. And compare The Doll Maker, which is about the human experience, with The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck, which is a bit of socialist realism, which treats the Southern farmers who were migrating to California as if they were pitiful, almost subhuman creatures. And the diaspora was largely a success story in the sense that most people are progressed economically. But it was very different from the mass migration today of Northerners, affluent Northerners, to the so-called Sun Belt. They're coming for better weather, for better people, and to take all the well-paid jobs that go with the new economic prosperity. This reverse migration is very different. Although it's also true that there is now, for the first time in a long time, a net migration of black people back to the South. And many of them affluent people, and many of them come from families of Southern origin who are coming back home. And polls show that a majority of black Americans say that the South is the only place where they feel comfortable in the United States. I don't expect that fact to have any impact whatsoever on the media or the political system, but it is a fact. We have a lot of complaint about the Southerners who have moved north. There have been several books about the Southernization of America, and what a horrible thing that is. I think it's quite true that probably the Southern migration has made those states a little less radical than they might have been otherwise. The Southerners have tended to be less enthusiastic about abortion, gun control, illegal aliens, sodomite marriage, and some of the other things that are so fashionable in those places. And the leftists have caught on to this, and they don't like it at all. There was a pundit a while back, it was the time of Timothy McVeigh, and the Unabomber and the Colorado shooters, and one brilliant pundit from Harvard wrote that the cause of all this was that the Southern gun culture had come into the North. Now, the McVeigh and the Unabomber didn't even use guns, but somehow this evil has seeped out of the South, you see, and contaminated the beautiful, pure North, which would be there would be no problems except for the South. And as Dr. Livingston mentioned, there are people saying they want to get rid of us, but they don't really. I mean, they could have let us go at any time, but they don't really want to get rid of us because they need us. You basically have a people that have no religion and no real culture, either folk culture or high culture, and they hang on to us so they can convince themselves that they are superior. And we can be the whipping boy. Southern Baptists now outnumber every other denomination in a number of Midwestern and Western states, even outnumber the Catholics in some cases. And, of course, another significant phenomenon of all this is the flourishing of the Southern people's music that was first called hillbilly, which is a term coined by a New York record executive to describe Southern white popular music, hillbilly, although by no means all country artists are from the hills. And then they call it country and western, and all of this is to avoid calling it Southern, which they consider not a good marketing strategy. The New York companies first disdained country music, then they learned they could make money from it. And they did make a lot of money from it, and now they're in the process of destroying it with music videos and corporate management. But it was a real phenomenon of the 70s, certainly. I suppose most of you are old enough to remember Loretta Lynn. She was truly a coal miner's daughter from Butcher Holler, Kentucky. But the mine closed, and she grew up and started singing in a lumber town in eastern Washington state. And the people all around there liked her music. Not only the diaspora Southerners, but everybody else. And by the 60s and 70s, country music had really become the music of choice for white working class Americans of all origins. And it was so popular that Nixon, Reagan, and the two Bushes pretended to like it and had themselves pictured with country music stars and so forth. Another aspect of this, and I'll get back to the music, but as late as World War I, only 8% of American black people lived outside the South. Only 8%, 92% still lived in the South in the early 20th century. Today it's 47%. Before World War I, Detroit had a black population of 5,000 people, and it was a totally submerged population. And during the war, black people began arriving from the South to take wartime jobs, and the press raised and raved about all of these unwanted, troublesome population that was coming from the South. They should stay in the South. And the press was full of stories about the Negro problem in Detroit. You know, this was a bad thing. And of course, this had always been the Northern attitude before, during, and after the war between the states. They won't be happy here. They should stay in the South, terrible as it is. In 1919, there was a race riot in Detroit, one of the worst in American history. 38 people died in that riot. And everybody, the press and everybody else, blamed it on the black people. And if you remember, another fact which they will never acknowledge, the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s was largely a northern movement. It had some southern trappings, but it added anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish elements which were not part of the southern tradition. They were part of the New England nativist tradition. Between 1933 and 1936, there was a violent Klan offshoot in the Midwest, in Michigan and Ohio, which was responsible for a string of murders and other crimes. And it was found that 64 state, county, city, and police officials in Michigan and Ohio were members of the Ku Klux Klan. None of them very likely a Southerner. And interestingly, the black people began to be somewhat accepted in the northern cities from beginning in the 1920s and for a long period because of the Amos and Andy radio show, which was about a group of black people who are not heart transplant surgeons or presidents, but who are pretty likable people. And the Amos and Andy show was created by two white men from Georgia. And this was the first sort of friendly exposure of the national audience to black people. And of course, hillbilly was the term used in the Midwest, and Okie in the West. And it was assumed that a Southern accent and slow, civilized behavior was a sign of ignorance and laziness. And it took them a while to get over that, and it was very strange that people, that ethnics in these areas who were one generation off the boat from Europe, where their people and peasants were ridiculing and feeling superior to these Southerners who were the founding stock of the country. And one Southerner commented that the only Americans he could find in Chicago were Southerners. The rest were all foreigners. But the Southerners actually did pretty well in a short while. The next great race riot occurred in Chicago in 1943. 34 people were killed. 96 white men were arrested in that riot. Out of the 96, only one person had a Southern birthplace. Most of them had Polish and Italian names. 70% were Catholic. And the newspapers immediately pounced on the idea that this race riot was caused by Southern hillbillies who had migrated to Chicago for the jobs. And they dwelt on this, over and over. And there were even stories about hillbilly ghettos where knife-wielding, razor-wielding white Southerners were cutting each other up, and this sort of thing. Things which did not exist, and we know how that goes with the press. The 1919 Detroit riot was blamed on the blacks. The Chicago riot of 1943 was blamed on the hillbillies. And portrayed the black people as victims of the white Southern migrants to the north. What had changed? I think the black people were participating in voting. The New Deal had loosened things up. The first black elected to Congress from other than the South was a black Republican from Chicago in the 1920s. But they were soon Democrats and starting to become powerful, and the powers in the Midwest were starting to pay attention to this. And of course, the New Deal generated a reformist sociological atmosphere, which said that society's main business was employing expert knowledge to identify and secure society's ill. And blaming the South is always the default position. In American discourse, as I tried to suggest, blame the South is always the default position. In the 1960s, the gospel word on race problems in the U.S. was in the Kerner Report. Kerner was a liberal politician, a governor of Illinois. Like all governor of Illinois, he later went to the penitentiary. But according to the Kerner Report, the dysfunction of black people in the big cities of the North, welfare dependency, unemployment, illegitimacy, crime, fatherless households, low educational achievement, drugs, etc., was the result of slavery, the heritage of slavery in the South. And we're talking about people who are 3 or more generations out of Dixie, and some studies actually indicated that black people from the South were less prone to these problems than those born in the North. But I guess most of you are too young to remember this, but this was the gospel. If we can just cure the heritage of slavery, then everything will be wonderful. And I suspect that is still gospel for most people. I recently read of someone who referred to Detroit, and we all know the terrible condition of Detroit these days, and this brilliant observer called Detroit an Alabama ghetto. So you see, Alabama is responsible for all these problems facing people who probably left there 4 generations ago. This is the way they think. I mean, we are the wicked people. And this is very, very typical. And it started 4 centuries ago when the Puritans stepped ashore on Massachusetts Bay. And it is still going on. And I think, forget about the slavery, forget about the tariff, forget about everything else. The reason our forefathers seceded and fought so hard to get free was because of these people. I mean, we don't want to be with people like this. We want to get free of them. A little bit of an upbeat note. I don't know if you're old enough to remember, or maybe you know from reruns, the Beverly Hillbillies show, which ran from 62 to 71, and at times was the #1 viewed show on American television. I guess they haven't figured out to take it off yet, but the show was conceived as a show about backward, ignorant country people, perhaps from Arkansas, who had oil discovered on their land, accidentally, of course, since they were not as smart as Northerners and couldn't do it themselves. But they became millionaires and moved to Beverly Hills. And this was conceived almost certainly as a vehicle to laugh at backward Southerners. But it turned out rather differently. Backward in speech, manners, attire, and attitudes, the Clampetts from the Southern Hills were kind and honest people. Buddy Ebsen was born in the southernmost tip of Illinois, was an admiral, patriarch. Granny Irene Ryan, born in Texas, was a monument of stubborn principle, even if often misguided. Ellie Mae Douglas from Kentucky was a model of sweet and modest womanhood. And these were, characters who gathered a good deal of sympathy, even admiration. And the other characters were rather typical Yankee types. The bad characters, Mr. Drysdale, the banker, who was an evil, conniving, greedy, shallow character. And Miss Jane, who was a well-meaning liberal, but was entirely clueless and ineffective in everything she did. And in one episode, Granny persistently believed through a number of episodes that the right side had won the war. She couldn't believe otherwise. And in one episode, she captured a drunken actor who was portraying General Grant. In a number of regions, Southerners actually dominated a few regions, southwestern Ohio, and in the San Joaquin Valley, which is the southern part of the great Central Valley of California. And Bakersfield became a germinating point for a revival of country music and an infusion of new and creative stuff into country music. That became literally a worldwide force, and still is, I suppose. The key figures were Roy Clark, born in Virginia, Buck Owens, born in Texas, and Merle Haggard, who was truly an Okie from Muskogee. Haggard's folks had left Oklahoma in 1934, and he was born 3 years later in a boxcar where his family was living in Oil Town, California. These people were all self-taught musicians, And it's important to note, I think, that they are not just pop singers. These people were poets. I mean, they were songwriters, writers of material that is passed into American life, like Merle Haggard's Working Man Blues or Okie from Muskogee. These are, I think we can have to say, these people are part of Southern literature. Although none was ever chosen to be the poet laureate of California, of course. And one that we'll hear from is Dwight Yoakam from Kentucky, who's made quite a success in Los Angeles, and he has a couple of songs about Los Angeles. And well, I let Mr. Harrelson comment on this music and play it. Nobody ever wrote a song about carry me back to old New Jersey or way up north in Minnesota or Illinois on my mind. So I think this music illustrates some of the things we've been teaching this week.
I remember one episode of the Beverly Hillbillies where Granny was trying to explain to Jethro exactly what the war was all about. And he actually said, Granny, what was this war all about? And she said, son, it's when the North invaded America. I suppose for that and several other reasons, in the early 1970s, CBS decided to pull not only the Beverly Hillbillies from their repertoire, but also well-known shows such as Green Acres and Petticoat Junction. The reason being they did not want to any longer be affiliated with what they considered to be the backwoods hillbilly culture of the American South. I told Kibler the other day that all this talk of dueling and music, I've thought of the perfect theme song for this conference. Dueling Banjos has got to be the theme song for this conference. I'm going to play some clips of some music. Got about 6 songs I want to share with you, and the first 3, Clyde chose those, are very good, and the final 3, I chose those, and I'm going to provide some information about it. I will say that I am very familiar with Harriet Arnaud's work. I am no musicologist. I'm writing a dissertation on Appalachian literature, the literature of the Southern Appalachian region. And Arnaud received a chapter in that dissertation. And I second Clyde's opinion, that very knowledgeable opinion, that Arnaud is perfect for anybody who wants to understand the diaspora from a truly literary perspective. The first song I want to play for you is a song written by Mel Tillis, as a matter of fact, from Florida. He stuttered all the time. I don't have time to go into the full story of his life. But this was recorded initially by Bobby Bear, who was born in Ohio, and he became part of the Nashville scene. Very famous, got a folksy sound, and I'm going to try to work the machine. So please do bear with me. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. Oh, how I wanna go home. Last night I went to sleep in Detroit City, and I dreamed about those cotton fields and home. I dreamed about my mother, dear old papa, sister, and brother. I dreamed about that girl who's been waiting for so long. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. Oh, how I wanna go home.
Home folks think I'm big in Detroit City. From the letters that I write, they think I'm fine. But by day I make the cards, by night I make the bars. If only they could read between the lines. 'Cause you know, I rode a freight train north to Detroit City. And after all these years I find that I've just been wasting my time. So I just think I'll take my foolish pride and put it on a southbound freight and ride. Go on back to the loved ones, the ones that I left waiting so far behind. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. Oh, how I wanna go home.
You gotta love that electric guitar in there. It's pretty. Well, that song, as you can tell, is about home. It's about a man who is displaced in Detroit. And, you know, a lot of these songs during this point in time, from the 1920s on forward through really the last quarter of the century, speak about Southerners going to these northern places and constantly thinking of their home place. Now, this second song that we're going to listen to is written by Dwight Yoakam. Now, he's as ugly as sin, but he can write music. He's born in Pike County, Kentucky in 1956, and a year later, his family moves to Columbus, Ohio. Now, because of frequent visits to their home place in Pike County, Yoakam had a very good understanding of Kentucky mountain life. He had a good understanding of tradition and a sense of place. And this song that we're going to hear is sort of a fun song. I enjoy it. Mike, if you could go ahead and play the second song, and we'll talk some more about this in a minute.
Girl, you taught me how to hurt real bad and cry myself to sleep. Showed me how this town shattered dreams. Another lesson about a naive fool who came to Babylon. Found out that the pie don't taste so sweet. Now his guitar's Cadillacs, hillbilly music, lonely, lonely streets that I call home. Yeah, my guitar's Cadillacs, hillbilly music, the only thing that keeps me hanging on. There ain't no glamour in this tinsel land of lost and wasted lives. Paint and scars are all that's left for me. Oh, but thank you, girl, for teaching me brand new ways to be cruel. If I can find my mind now, I guess I'll just leave. And his guitar's Cadillacs, hillbilly music, lonely, lonely streets that I call home. Yeah, my guitar's Cadillacs, hillbilly music, the only thing that keeps me hanging on.
Okay, now that song is, of course, written by Yoakum. He was an excellent, excellent songwriter. That song was very, very famous in country music. I think it was actually a #1 hit. And that was a part of what's now called the neo-traditionalist movement in country music history. This began in the 1980s with the coming along of people like Ricky Skaggs and Randy Travis, bands like Shenandoah and Alabama. Because up until the 1980s, country music started to develop more of a pop sound with people like Kenny Rogers. And so country music, the history of it as a whole has gone in circles for the past 56 years. It becomes more mainstream for a brief amount of time, and then it becomes more traditional. And so it's speaking to two different audiences all the time. There used to be a network on television, the Nashville network, TNN. It's not there anymore. CBS bought it, and they destroyed it. And so now if you have certain satellite programs, you can get RFD TV. And that's where all of the traditional audiences go to watch shows like The Marty Stewart Show and things like that, the Cumberland Highlanders, because the audiences have never been the same. The people who listen to the more mainstream country music are not going to enjoy the more traditional music. So you pick and so it goes in those circles, the history of it does. Now this next song is a very, the lyrics are excellent. It's entitled I Sang Dixie. I want you to listen to the lyrics very closely in this song because it tells a story that is very, very valuable. Mike, if you could go ahead and play that song for us. Also written by Dwight Yoakam.
I sang Dixie as he died. People just walked on by as I cried. The bottle had robbed him of all his rebel pride. So I sang Dixie as he died. He said way down yonder in the land of cotton, old times there ain't near as rotten as they are on this damned old LA street. Then he drew a dying breath, laid his head against my chest. Please, Lord, take his soul back home to Dixie. I sang Dixie as he died. People just walked on by as I cried. The bottle had robbed him of all his rebel pride. So I sang Dixie as he died. Listen to me, son, while you still can. Run back home to that southern land. Don't you see what life here has done to me? And he closed those old blue eyes and fell limp against my side. No more pain. Now he's safe back home in Dixie. I sang Dixie as he died. People just walked on by as I cried. The bottle had robbed him of all his rebel pride. So I sang Dixie sang Dixie as he died.
All right, thank you, Mike. Notice the lyrics in the pretty story that song tells. And Yoakum is a part of this major movement that happens with Southerners moving out, moving to various places to find work and so forth. His parents were a part of that. And his musical mentor was Buck Owens. And you'll remember Buck Owens perhaps from the show Hee Haw that came on years and years ago. Hardly nobody in my generation knows anything about that show anymore. But it's good Southern humor. They might call it country humor or whatever. It's good Southern humor. The next song that I want to share with you is a song written by a man called Dennis Lindy. And Lindy was from Abilene, Texas, and he's been called Nashville's best-kept songwriting secret. And this is absolutely true. He wrote dozens of songs that have become popular in country music over the past 30 years. You will recognize them, I'm sure, if I went through the list, but you will perhaps not recognize the song that I'm going to play next. It's entitled Under the Kudzu, and it was recorded in 1993 by a band based in Alabama called Shenandoah. And I'm sure you may have heard that name if you listen to country music at all, but to me, this song for years in my personal life has represented Southern identity and Southern history in ways that 1,000 history books could never accomplish. It is a true piece of poetry. It is a true piece of literature in the Southern tradition. And it is also a part of this neo-traditionalist movement in country music. Now, Mike, if you would go ahead and play that one, and I have a few more words I'd like to share about that song.
Chickasaw County, out on 109, where the rundown barns and rusty tractors are covered in kudzu vine. Now for 85 years my people raised cotton till Granddaddy lost this land. Now we're scattered all over this end of the state, getting by any way that we can. But under the kudzu, the mighty South lies sleeping, dreaming of glory that slowly slipped away. And on nights like this, boys, I can almost hear her weeping out there under the kudzu. If you follow that hot tar road down to Jackson, you'll pass through Plantersville. That's where I worked and spent my money until they closed down the mill. I got real bad to drink some my sweet Samantha, packed up the things and knew. I hear she's a qualified beautician working down in Baton Rouge. And under the kudzu, the mighty South lies sleeping, dreaming of glory that slowly slipped away. And on nights like this, boys, I can almost hear her weeping out there under the kudzu. Yes, I'll walk on over to the pit stop market and buy me a Coke to drink. I'll lay on the hood of this old Camaro and wait for the sun to sink.
right, Mike, you can go ahead and cut that one off. Now, what's happening in this song? The chorus is all about the South and its stability. The verses are constantly describing various things that are happening in the life of an individual person, everyday experiences. The first verse, he's talking about the fact that his family used to farm cotton. For 85 years, my people farmed cotton till Granddaddy lost his land. Now we're scattered all over this end of the state, getting by any way we can. I would submit to you that the idea of the Southern Diaspora is not simply that of people moving outside of the South into other states and other regions within the American Union. That diaspora involves, over the course of the 20th century, people moving off of the land into cities in the southern environment, and they feel displaced. It's not simply going to Detroit and going to Chicago. It's going to places like the godforsaken Atlanta and, Charlotte or any place like this. But the second verse is talking about a personal relationship that he has with a woman. And it's disappointing. The first verse is talking about a disappointment. We're not on the land anymore. The second verse is speaking about yet another disappointment. I don't have this relationship anymore. It's about loss. But ultimately, the stability is found in the South, in that sense of place, that sense of rootedness, which that chorus is. I don't know whether you were able to understand exactly those lyrics. The lyrics for the chorus go like this. But, there's always that transitional word going into the chorus out of the verse. But under the kudzu, the mighty South lies sleeping, dreaming of glory that slowly slipped away. And on nights like this, I can almost hear her weeping out there under the kudzu. That's poetical. I don't see how anybody could say that songwriters in the Southern tradition are anything less than literary artists. They are powerful literary artists. And I think that's one of the primary arguments that we're making here. The next song from Ricky Skaggs. Skaggs is very good. He's famous now because of his bluegrass music. He was famous in the 1980s for bringing the first originally bluegrass song to the charts for country music. His Uncle Pen in 1985 became a #1 hit in the country music industry. And that was originally a Bill Monroe bluegrass song. And so in the early 90s, he wanted to make a transition out of country music. It was becoming too commercialized. His record company started to tell him how to record his music, what songs to record, who he was going to have on his band. And so you got to understand something about Nashville as we move increasingly through the 20th century. It is controlled by successful business people who know nothing about the songwriters and the places where the music is coming from. They are using the Southern songwriters for commercial purposes. And so Skaggs says, all right, I'll finish out my contract with this record company. And what he does in about 1996 is he starts his own record label. And he begins to record bluegrass music again. And he's been successful in that, and he's done a lot of research on the Celtic roots of bluegrass music. He is an avid researcher. He is a real scholar, and he has an honorary doctorate. And he travels through Ireland and Scotland studying the history of those people and how those traditions relate to the musical traditions, particularly, of the southern uplands. He has a quote, and this is from an interview that he did recently. It's a beautiful quote, and this tells you a lot about Ricky Skaggs in his life as a music artist. He says, music is a part of who God is. And speaking of the modern listener, he says, they don't even know that it's him. They don't even know that it's him. So in Ricky Skaggs, let me say that again. In speaking about the modern listener, he says, music is a part of who God is. And they don't even know it's him. In other words, God is the part of music that everybody loves, although he is seldom recognized. So that tells you a little bit about the seriousness of Skaggs, not simply as a popular music artist. We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with a genuine literary figure here in the Southern tradition. He was born in Cortal, Kentucky. And early on in life, he played for people like Bill Monroe and Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. And he has become essentially what many people consider to be the successor of Bill Monroe and continuing the bluegrass tradition. Okay, Mike, if you would play the next song. It's called A Hard Road to Hoe. It's an excellent story in this, and just listen to the word.
Spent my life on a John Deere tractor, made my living by the sweat of my brow, raised a family on the fruit of the land, from a seed, a prayer, and a plow. Fought the wind, the hail and twisters, 5-year droughts and the bitter cold. But this man-made hell has made my life a hard road to hoe. In our struggle for survival, the farmers' battle lines have formed against the squeeze on every dollar and the shrinking price of corn. While we live with trade embargoes and a surplus overflows, just to feed my wife and family makes it a hard road to hoe. We're the backbone of this nation, Lord, it's a painful source of grief. We're the first to feel the pinch and the last to get relief. If things don't change, the family farmer's gonna go the way of the buffalo. Heaven help us, Lord, it's a hard road to hoe. The final blow, it came this morning in a note from the FHA. There'll be no more extensions on the note that I can't pay. They're gonna sell my farm at auction, lock, stock, and cotton bowl. That leaves me, my wife, and babies with a hard road to hoe. We're the backbone of this nation, Lord, it's a painful source of grief. We're the first to feel the pinch and the last to get relief. If things don't change, the family farmer's gonna go the way of the buffalo. Heaven help us, Lord, it's a hard road to hoe. Heaven help us, Lord, it's a hard road to hoe.
All right, Mike, you can cut it off. Okay, notice what this is a story about. The family is losing their farm because of an inability to keep up with an agribusiness type world that farming becomes as a result of, the Second World War and a lot of other things I can't go into right now. But this is a story of, it reminds me a lot of what C. Van Woodward says in his Strange Career of Jim Crow. Now, that book has already been mentioned one time, and that is a book about it's essentially Woodward responding to segregation, and he wrote it in the 1950s. But he has an interesting point that is seldom recognized in that book, and he says perhaps in future years, when historians look back to the 20th century South, they will decide that the decline of the South's traditional agricultural civilization is perhaps far more important than this debate over segregation. In other words, he was trying to place that into perspective. This is important, but ultimately the South is losing its agricultural identity. And we see that expressed in this song, Hard Road to Hoe. I mean, it's tough business operating a farm. And what's happening over the course of this diaspora, whether people are moving into northern states or whether they're moving into southern cities, that they are making a choice to leave the farm for whatever the reason may be, to help their families, to make more money, to create a more healthy environment for their families. Whatever their argument was, it is a seismic shift in Southern history that's happening. This shift away from the land. And the music is chronicling that shift in 20th century American history. This next song, the final song that I'll play, is a song that I tried to quote in my talk Sunday night, Dolly Parton's Smoky Mountain Memories. This is an excellent song that describes her relationship with her father. Several people, when she was a child, she was born in the 40s, so we're in that time period, 1900 to 1970. that James Gregory speaks about in his work on the Southern Diaspora. We're in that time period. And so her daddy, he decides that he's going to go to Detroit, Michigan and work in the car plants because that's what everybody's telling him to do. You want more money? You want to be successful? Go work in the car plants in Detroit. And so he listens to him. He goes to Detroit. He's not happy. He doesn't stay long at all. And he decides to come stay back home. And he works out a living from the land the best way he can. And he raises his children on that little farm in East Tennessee, and he produces one of the greatest songwriters that American history has ever known, Miss Dolly Parton. Mike, if you would play Smoky Mountain Memories, the last song on this. Give it a minute. It's a live recording.
You ought to go north, somebody told us, 'cause the air is filled with gold dust, and fortune falls like snowflakes in your hands. Now I don't recall who said it, but we'd spent our lives on credit, so we just headed out to find our promised land. Just poor Smoky Mountain farm folk with nothing more than high hopes, so we hitched our station wagon to a star. But our dreams all fell in on us, 'cause there was no land to promise. Lord, it's a struggle, just keep in sight of who you are. Oh, and these northern nights are dreary, and my southern heart is weary, as I wonder how the old folks are back home. But I know that they all love me, and I know they're thinking of me. And Smoky Mountain memories keep me strong. You know, I've been thinking just a whole lot lately about what's been and what awaits me. It takes all I've got to give what life demands. Oh, you go insane if you give in to it. Life's a meal, and brother, I've been through it. I'm just so thankful I'm creative with my plans. Oh, and these northern nights, they're dreary. These old southern eyes are teary, as I wonder how the old folks are back home. Smoky Mountain memories keep me strong. If I'll keep looking to the Father, He'll keep my head above the water. While these Smoky Mountain memories keep me strong.
It's beautiful. She wrote that. Why we have so many people in the South today who seem afraid to listen to good music like this because they don't want to be labeled backwards or hillbilly by people in their own communities. It's an absolute ridiculous notion that we should appreciate what Europeans write and what Europeans sing and what Northerners write and what Northerners sing, but we should never appreciate our own people. So I've got to stop, but anyway, I thank Clyde for giving me the opportunity to help him with this. I'm honored. I don't deserve the opportunity. I want to leave you with one thought that Marion Montgomery shared with me a few years ago. Marion Montgomery, I don't know if you know him or not. He's passed on now. He's an excellent writer. I had some conversations with him, and I recorded one of them. And it's an excellent conversation, and I often refer to it and sort of to receive some inspiration in things that I'm writing myself. But one day Mary Montgomery told me, he said, traditional Southerners have become members of an intellectual and cultural diaspora. He was right. Today, Southerners still move about, but now without any real sense of place and rootedness. As Southerners continue to find themselves aliens, not in Chicago or Detroit necessarily, but rather in their own country, I wonder if the music of Southern Diaspora should not now express desire to return to a home that may no longer exist. Why? Because the grounds of this home are now surrendered to abstraction. Clyde, thank you for letting me help you. Thank you for your time.